Welcome to Tapped In, our brand spanking new. This is day one premiere. That little echo came. Our brand new weekly show, hosted by two friends and business owners on a journey of living our lives of full integrity. Because once you're tapped in, you cannot tap out.
Fairy goddess in the building.
We are here, Siobhan and Midori, to share our stories, our perspectives, and our visions for the future, as well as share insights for other creative entrepreneurs divesting from all of this. This show is going to be fun. It's going to be heartfelt, and it's going to be very emergent. We will definitely laugh. We'll probably cry. I'll speak for myself. I'll probably cry. And we'll be channeling messages for the collective in hopes of bringing comfort and guidance for these unprecedented times. My name is Siobhan. I'm a mother and the calm siren of soft power. And I'm the founder of Raised and Rooted, a scientifically, politically, and spiritually informed reproductive care community. I'm joining from Ohlone Land, better known as San Francisco, where I am raised and rooted myself. And this is my co-host.
Hi, y'all. I'm Midori, and I am what I like to call an artist alchemist. I'm a astrology and forever student of the practice and founder of Sanctuary Studio, my public art practice and sacred business dedicated to utilizing art, creativity, astrology to translate messages from the unseen. And I am calling in from now Tongva Land, and better known as Los Angeles. I was previously located in the Bay Area and will eventually be back, but that's how Siobhan and I really got connected. I was living in the Bay Area together, so I'm excited to be down here now. And a little intro to Soft Power. Soft Power is a community and collective of artists, healers that connect people of the diaspora to our ancestral traditions, creative power, and roles for collective liberation, y'all. We create content and media to share our stories and create in-person and virtual experiences that foster belonging. So we are always going to open everything we do with a sacred. They're all sacred spaces, so just really grounding into our intentions here to provide our energy, the frequency of soft power to our communities, and really is, I think, our calling to share more of ourselves and share more vulnerably. So intention is to just kick off this beautiful container as a way to pay veneration and homage to our ancestors, to our ascended guides, to all of our guides that have been leading us here, to share more, to be, really, really sharing more of ourselves and using our voices to elevate and communicate the messages that are flowing through us and that are for the collective. So that is our little ceremonious beginning. We have both lit candles. We have both taken a intentional breath to open up this space. And it's really about intentionality. So thank you for tapping in with us. Thank you for being here. And you are now tapped into the soft power frequency. Your fingers.
Beautiful. Thank you. As we said, this is our very first one. Last week we did a Instagram live, which was intended to be we called it episode 0 because we just knew that we wanted to get started, but probably the process would improve within a week, which it did. So this is episode 1. We're going to talk again. If you caught our IG Live, you're a real one, but many didn't. So this is a new audience. We're going to share more about how this came to be. But what I want to give us all the rundown of is the format of our show, because we, in picking if we want to do a podcast or a live show, we love the energy of being live, and we actually will be converting this into a podcast. So if you're listening later, this is a live show. We air every Wednesday at 1:11 p.m. Pacific time. Originally we went with Monday, and that energy wasn't right, and it's because Wednesday is Mercury Day, ruled by Mercury. Communication just felt more our energy. So if you can't see us, we are 2 Asian American femmes. I'm Siobhan. I'm Filipino and Irish. I have long dark hair, fair skin, a couple tattoos, and a nose ring. Midori is a beautiful Chinese Japanese American femme with short black hair, wearing a sheer black button up. Ooh, it's a button down. and some gold jewelry as well. So you probably want to come see us live on here if you're listening later. That's all I'll say about that. But the format flow of this is going to be really similar to how we run our personal check-ins, collaborative check-ins, because part of that is, we are co-founders of Soft Power. We have also just been supporting one another on our business journeys in the past year or so, even though we've known each other about a decade. And so we've kind of come into and co-created this culture of how we're doing business, and that's really why we're sharing. We were really nudged to share how we do these things. So we always start with a celebration, and then after the celebrations, we'll get into our weekly topic. We'll take some questions, and the last portion we'll be doing is a collective reading, because as Midori said, she's an astrologer, as well as oracle reader. I'm a tarot reader and have a couple other divination things, and we would love to close it off with just a relevant, timely, collective message to y'all. So let me pass it to Midori. What are you celebrating today, this week, generally?
I am celebrating us really leaning into the courage that it takes to show up and share ourselves vulnerably. I keep saying that, but I think for me, and knowing my astrological chart, my natal chart, a lot of my fear has been around sharing my voice. And I think that is just my cultural upbringing as being Asian American and growing up not feeling like I was empowered in sharing my perspective. And a lot of the times, I think growing up in my childhood, I was very silent, actually. And so this feels very karmic to be sharing my story, to be going on here and allowing myself to be seen and witnessed in this way. And putting it out there, unabashedly, being this is what we do, and claiming the space. And I think that's what's been so powerful about living in this day and age with platforms like YouTube, streaming platforms like Twitch, where we can just create our own platforms. So I'm really, really juiced to be here, and I'm celebrating the courage and just our emergent style of business, and our emergent creative practice of just doing it, even if we don't have all the tools. There's so Siobhan and I were just on all these platforms setting it up right before this, and so some people that may stress them out, but for me, I think it's really a testament to our level of faith, the level of faith I've cultivated in myself, and to know we're in this for the long game. We're in this for the long game. We're here to really build something, to build a foundation. I'm just celebrating the courage it took for me to be yes, I'm going to do this. And Siobhan's been saying for a long time that we're going to be we're going to have a podcast and a live show. And I've been honestly pretty hesitant because I think I've like really shrouded a lot of my work in controlling my image. So this is my practice of stepping out of that. So celebrating that. And what are you celebrating, Siobhan?
On that same wave, yeah, I'm really celebrating that faith and trust that we had in being summoned to this task, to trusting each other, to just roll with it. And yeah, when Joy said, I had been getting this push, like just energetically, that's like to share this in a podcast or a streaming form. And Midori was like, I don't know. And then one day she just hit me up and was like, I got to download. We're absolutely supposed to do a podcast. And I was like, let's fucking go. And that was like 3 weeks ago, to be real. So I'm really celebrating that. Just like this more easeful way of being faith-led. And so just anybody listening, if you don't consider yourself like a particularly spiritual person, I think part of what we're doing here is just normalizing it. Like this isn't a spiritual show. Spirituality just touches the lens that we see the world through. And so whatever you want to call it, mindfulness, presence, whatever it is, we really just move from that. Like we really move from a place of being in connection to our intuition, keeping our like somatic, energetic body, our chi, like conditioned so that we can move with more trust and faith in the world. And that's the way that we do business. It's very much, and that's actually the question we got for later was around that. So I'll hold off on that. But that's going to be a lot of what we talk about is like our creative process, because we, to speak for both of us, just believe that our creativity is tied to our spirit and that it is coming from a very centered, divine place. And if you're an artist and you're like, I'm not spiritual, but I'm definitely an artist, it's just that feeling of flow that you get into. So we'll get into all that, but I'm definitely celebrating that. And then, I'm celebrating that we are out of all the retrogrades as of today. All planets are direct. Yeah, that's a celebration. And I'm also celebrating the last thing is that just this birth of soft power. This week has been a really big birthing week for soft power. We got the fairy goddess in the YouTube comments who hosts Soul Play every Saturday. We're throwing a Lunar New Year celebration. And I think all of us have been on this like emotional ride of clicking, like a lot of these pieces from the last few years of all the change and the grief and all of that, just like clicking into like finally tasting why we were thrown through the trenches. Because we were, y'all. We were.
Oh my God. It's been rough.
Yeah, we were in the trenches, and we'll share a lot more about that. I actually think next week's live will be really focused on Midori's story, and then the week after myself, because there's a long road that got us here, that got us to even sitting and showing ourselves live. When I shouldn't say when I met, but when I became friends with Midori, that was the story that she was always saying was like, I don't know how to speak. I don't know how to use my words. I don't feel comfortable or safe doing that. So I'm celebrating that for you. Just like witnessing that growth of you speaking more. And me, it's like I've always been speaking, and now it's speaking in the right audience that's like opting in rather than speaking to people who don't give a fuck. Yeah.
Yes. And we're here for the people who may be like kind of hesitant or maybe like, wait, what's up with this? Like, what is all this spiritual lingo? What is magic? What is being a witch mean? Like, we are here to unpack that. So if you're curious, this is the right place for you. We're going to be covering a lot. And really like destigmatizing these archetypes that have been demonized in popular culture, specifically within the colonial paradigm.
Yeah, so that brings us to our topic today, which is giving that background of why and how politics and spirituality are intertwined. Because when we came down to our intentions for soft power, for me, I think that was a big part of who we're calling out to are both the spiritually informed people who think they're not political or who disengage from the politics, which is really just like the personal is political, you know, like bringing them to that understanding that your spiritual path, if it doesn't bring you to this present moment and political involvement of what's happening in the world right now, we want to offer that perspective. And the total other end of people who are politically active, you know, I guess the closest groups we would be placed with are like leftist, progressive, anarchist, a little, you know, just that edge, and showing people on there who bridging that understanding for people there who think that spirituality is not compatible, because the history of how we talk about spirituality and witchcraft and working with the land and all the things that get dismissed as woo, which will also go into what that even means. There's a political reason. There's a political reason for all of that. So that's the topic of the week, is politics, spirituality, crossover, and how we ended up here and why we're saying that. So I want to actually can I ask you, it'll be like a two-way interview kind of. Because I want to ask you how your political, I think, did your political kind of awakening start before your spiritual big one?
Honestly,
which one led to the other for you? I would love to hear that story of like,
it was definitely, yeah. It was definitely spiritual first. And I'm just going to name it. Like, I do come from a level of privilege. And I think specifically, I grew up in Orange County. And I think that is also part of my path, is just really naming my identities, my intersectional identities, and like how that informs, and how I think in general it informs a lot of the Asian American experience. And for me, it's coming from a level of privilege of growing up here and being so insulated, being really assimilated into quote unquote American culture of very capitalistic, very material, like wanting to, being very, very focused on my bag, what I am doing, very individualistic. What am I doing to make sure I got the house, I got the car, I got the food on the table, and everything else is secondary. And I think like what really awakened me was that I actually really was able to get to that point where I did have all those things. I had the career I really wanted. In the beauty industry, as a creative director, I really had the monogamous partner who I thought was going to be my life partner. And I had everything that to like standard American culture was the idea of success. And I was still really unhappy. I was like miserable because I was like, wow, I reached all these levels of success, and now what? For what? So there was this level of like dissatisfaction and then guilt of why I was unhappy. Like, I should be happy. Why am I not happy? Given that I've worked so hard for all of these things, and this was the pinnacle of my idea of success. So yeah, my spiritual awakening really happened then, where I'm just like, then it got really philosophical. Like, what is my foundation for success? What is my idea of happiness? What do I believe happens after this life? Like, if I've already reached all these markers of success, what comes after this? If I am like doing things in the way that society has taught me to do them, and I'm still unhappy, what does that mean to like my sort of philosophical understanding of what happiness is?
So how did that open your political world? Is there anything you can think of that like made it all click, that it was connected?
Yeah, I think then I really started educating on myself on capitalism, and my background is in marketing, so really unpacking like, what am I doing when I'm actually promoting products, right, for people to buy? It was then kind of like, okay, so like, what does this all mean within the structure of broader society when what does it mean to like sell something to somebody? And so that was like really what opened it up to me, is like, what does this mean to actually convince somebody that they need to buy something in order to be happy? And so capitalism, and that really the idea, all of the framework of like understanding what capitalism is and how it infiltrates. And I was really thinking about like, how does capitalism actually become a religious kind of ideology? Because that is the foundation of the infrastructure of like the American dream.
I think part of the design is to disconnect from spiritual understanding, which I believe like is just the same as pre-colonial ways of seeing the world, that we're interconnected. Capitalism pushes us to focus on the individual and isolate an individual thing so that more people will feel the pressure to buy, to expand, to grow, to monopolize. And when that consumerist mindset is like, I need my own this, I need my own that, because we're all we got, we're on our own, me and my nuclear family, us against the world. And if you're not married with 2 children and a dog, then you're doing it wrong. And how many people actually live like that? Very, very, very few. It's the image of it that makes everyone look up like, oh, that's what I'm supposed to have, and I don't. Let me buy something to fix it. And I actually should probably look up the stats. Like, who the fuck has a nuclear family? I never really seen. I mean, probably a couple at this point. Well, you had one.
I mean, I had that idea. Honestly, my parents also became that vision, right, of like the nuclear family that is very isolated in the suburbs, that is not directly connected to community, and does not see people on a daily basis other than their partner or their child. And it's very, very, very isolated. And that was me too. Like, I was just buying shit to like satisfy this kind of like craving of like spiritual longing. And I was like, nothing is hitting, like, and it's just like, I think, and then really that opened up just like a whole world for me of, once you, like we've been saying, once you tap into that knowledge of structural and systemic oppression, you can't tap out. So it was like really unfolding, like, okay, where does capitalism come from? The history of that. And like how recent that really is too. And I think like I'm still on my journey, I think you really have a lot more knowledge, Siobhan, in terms of like history and being able to contextualize these sort of frameworks. But I think it's always going to be a learning process for me to unpack everything. And it's really hard too, because I live in the suburbs now. So I see it all in real time of how people are just so isolated. Unsolved mysteries too. It's crazy to me. I think a certain rapper named Nefex put it like this: everybody lacks what they need internal, so they compensate with everything external. Yeah. Yeah.
And Fairy Goddess dropped the bell hooks quote, the cultural emphasis on endless consumption deflects attention from spiritual hunger. That's on point, and I'm going to let that guide us next into that, because I think that's what it is. Because like someone else said here, some of the most hardworking people you know are still unhappy, and it comes down to how you really define success. And so I think that really says it all, honestly, because when I think about this crossover of the political and spiritual, and the other question, which was what's the idea behind this show, this really ties it all together, because I think that's what we saw lacking on both ends of that, because both Midori and I, that's how we reconnected, was through the spiritual aspect, but me noticing that her spiritual, the things she was sharing were not bypassing the reality of the world that we live in. She wasn't talking about ascending this dimension or moving to the jungle and exiting the matrix, because part of that, when we do contextualize our spirituality into the present moment, into this world, and this quote here, the spiritual hunger should lead us into what's missing here, which is the community and the moment. She is the moment. We are here for this moment. Like, that's really what I think it came down to, what the intention around this, why we felt so called, speaking for us both. We try not to speak for each other, but there's certain things we totally can. That's like, we are here at this week. If you believe, for me, if I believe that my soul and my existence is infinite, and I have existed in other timelines and other places and other just lifetimes, then it brings me back to why am I here? If you haven't watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, go watch that movie. I think it really captures, in a cinematic way, how we sort of do see our existences. That's like, we could be anywhere and our souls are right here. So what are we doing about it? And I think that's where that's a shared value between us, of seeing this in the spiritual quote industry, which I really, some things should just not be called an industry, but it is, like the spiritual coaching industry, seeing like, okay, like, is this still upholding the conditions that have created this spiritual hunger? Some, yes. Is it pretending that those don't matter and that we can totally exit and not participate? Also, yes. And so
it's called spiritual bypassing, y'all, and it's rampant, specifically on a lot of social media in the spiritual and wellness spaces. And I think that, like you said, just really reiterating it, that is our intention for going on and really connecting all the dots between why this is all interconnected: spirituality, magic, politics. It does not, it's all intertwined, and we can't separate it from each other, because like we were just talking about, capitalism is in the thread, is in the fabric of everything we do. It cannot be untangled from anything that exists in our reality.
Totally, because if we're looking at what this comment says about what the government wants us to believe, again, it comes back to the design. And I think so much of it is recognizing the design of the world we exist in, and then remembering that we have the ability and the duty to co-create this design. We could take our hammers and smash it, honestly, because why does the government want us to believe that? Again, money, profit, their own disconnection from spirit and disconnection from land, and this lie that we are independent and every man for themselves. And I think throughout this show, we'll really go into those histories and stuff. because that's where I would love to move this toward, is like the history of why spirituality is divorced from politics and day-to-day life, despite, and let's just say for who we're speaking to, which are politically left people, because people in the right wing, they believe that in their own warped way. I don't really think we're going to have many of those listeners on here. But we could speak to that, where it's like, if we're in a time where people recognize, we hear the words like decolonizing everything, like now land acknowledgements have made it to the corporate level. People who understand indigenous, like that land was stolen from indigenous people, that indigenous people were stolen from their lands in Africa, indigenous Africans, and enslaved into building everything for us here on someone else's stolen land. Like, all of that is layers and layers of divorcing not only just this is their land, but how did they interact with the land. And I think that's kind of the piece sometimes that gets missing on the left, is like there's still a layer of saviorism and like, oh, well, it's there, so we should give it back, rather than what I think we believe, which is like they hold these values that we all held once upon a time, and therefore these should be our leaders in reconnecting us. Because look around, think about what's going on with your weather recently. California, we just had how much flooding and destruction, and what was getting uprooted, trees that are not native to this land that were the ones uprooted. What was flooding? Waterways that were paved over. It's really not destruction, it's restoration. Yeah. I want to talk about the stigmas though around that.
Yeah.
So,
well, actually, can we hear your story? I want to hear your story as well.
Oh.
And since I'm gonna throw it back to you.
Yeah.
What was what really opened up the realization that the spiritual was political and the political is spiritual?
Yeah, so I grew up in a really political family, in a very working class labor union organizers, volunteering on campaigns and going to strikes on the weekend kind of family. And that's how mostly everyone on my dad, and that's my father's side was that in San Francisco. And then to a degree, my mom's side was like that, because her father was an attorney in the Philippines, city council member, very much this like structural participation for good, doing things for good, which now I would categorize under neoliberal, because how I understand those terms is like neoliberals want to work within the existing system to improve and transform. And so I grew up in that world, participating. My dad was like a campaign manager for someone that went from like very local to the state level. Similar, I guess, for you is like your family achieved the whatever. My family was like really deep in the like, we can do this. And just watching the way that leads to burnout, how it still relies on gatekeeping, because even though there were, let's take for example Cesar Chavez, he is known as being the advancer of labor rights, but he was really anti-indigenous in a lot of ways. He was really anti like undocumented people, because working within the system still means you're loyal to the system. And so as I got older and participated there and got really frustrated and burnt out, and then witnessing that it's the system itself, that's when I became very radicalized politically, understanding. It's like, just like once I heard the history, it was like, oh, I never heard that before. To me, it's really easy. You get new information, you change your mind. Like,
the thing is that people are not getting new information or seeking it out.
yeah, that, and being in the ego that there's somehow this crime to run back on your word, like the like the lack of humility to be like, oh, I was wrong. Like, I was wrong is such a rare and valuable phrase that I think everyone should work into their, like, just practice saying it for yourself. Once, if you feel your physical reaction when you say the phrase, I was wrong about that, like, that used to actually be hard for me to say. And so now I think I've grown in that. And then coinciding with, like, if we're talking about like the crossover, it was like I was always politically aware. And then probably when I was around 20, I read my first Thich Nhat Hanh book, who was a Buddhist monk, RIP. And I just started learning more of these concepts, appreciating them. And then there were a couple events in my life where I always had this feeling that there was a bigger force at play, but it didn't become really a direct channel until I honestly was at my lowest and most desperate moment. And that will be a story for another day. But I'm somebody who was married and had, again, this not really traditional, I even thought I was adapting away from the traditional in my own way. But still, it wasn't embodied true to who I was. And so I found myself in this marriage with these expectations on me to be a good mother, a good wife, and my body was physically panicking because of how misaligned that was for me, how untrue to myself I was being. And so there's just this moment where I literally was just like at my lowest, loneliest point and feeling desperate. And that is when I felt like the literal spiritual intervention of my ancestors, like, no, like, you're not alone. We're here. If that's what you need to hear and see for you to keep going and for you to get yourself out of this, then we'll show up for you. Like, if no one else is showing up for you right now, we're going to show up. And then from there, it just opened up. I started noticing people like Midori and reached out to her. And it was literally like, we've known each other for 10 years, but we were just Instagram friends, never had a one-on-one conversation. And I think I've just messaged and was like, hey, I noticed something different and I really like it and resonate with it. And then it just kind of like planted the seed there for our friendship. And then realizing like, okay, we're kind of spotting the same things around here. We came from a corporate world, understanding marketing, me understanding PR and brand messaging and communications. It's like, whoa, like there's something so dishonest around this. And we both, I think, are such honest people. Is probably part of being neurodivergent, is like we're less capable of bullshitting. That's like, hey, we can't lie about this. And so, anyone that might think that we're, like, people like to see witches online and think that there's scammers, and there's absolutely scammers.
There's absolutely scammers.
Yeah. I just want to let you know, like, we're not that good actors to be scammers.
Yeah. And honestly,
it's too much energy we don't have. We're pillow princesses. We are not here to put in the work to scam people. Shout out all the scam artists.
Shout out all the scam artists. I cannot lie for the life of me, so I would be an awful scam artist. Yeah, and honestly, Siobhan's work is truly, you're here for the people. And I think like that is something that, knowing your astrology, which we'll get into later, is like Sag rising, Jupiter ruled chart, expansive, and not going to take shit. We're not here to, I mean, we're very, we can call it out, abolitionist, and we're not here to cut corners. Like, we're here to rebuild. To what are we building that is in place of these harmful structures, these harmful ways of being. So
that creative team, yeah, I think that would be so I think for people new to us and our work, that's something really important about soft power and what that even means and how you brought that to the conversation, is that we are more focused on creation. So that actually could have summed up everything I said, was like being in a place of working with it and then thinking it needed to be destroyed, which it will destroy itself the more we build. And even working in our own way, that's like, okay, we still live under capitalism. What is capitalism? That we all have the opportunity to create something better and the consumer can choose. That's kind of part of what we're doing, is like, we're here to share our stories and give people who listen the opportunity to choose differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I think the creative entrepreneur terms that we've been using, it just really does speak to we are working within the system. We have to survive, right? And like, how do you do things in ways that do feel aligned to your values, that you don't feel like you're completely just submitting to the way things have been done? And how do we take these tools like this, streaming, right? We could have gone a completely different direction with this and just whatever, tried to sell products or done, a vlog that doesn't talk about our values in the way that we want to, but we are choosing to do this and choosing really intentionally the topics that we talk about and what we want to distribute to the people. So yeah, I think that's all part of our plan, and really like speaking to what you were saying earlier around the stigmas is what I feel like we're here to break. And yeah, the real, the keyword here that we put in the title is witches. And I think you probably have a lot to say about the witch title, but given that I love that you call yourself a birth witch. So I would love to hear too a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm a birth witch, trained full spectrum doula. I have played with different titles over the years. When I first joined this field 3 years ago, it was definitely doula. Then the root of the word doula, I found, is like rooted in the Greek word for slave. So then a lot of people are trying to shift it. There's birth worker, birth keeper, all these different terms. And eventually why I settled only recently on really sticking to birth witch is because to me, the word witch encompasses both the role, which is working with all of the elements available to us. I believe that's what a witch is working with the elements, the land, everything, all the energies, and seen and unseen, because witches were the original scientists. And two, because of the political stigma around the word witch, now that I understand what the design was around that, I feel like giving visibility and neutralizing that word is really significant for people who are on this path of decolonization, because a lot of witch stuff has been also watered down by, white or people of European descent who publicly identify as witches, but don't really have a strong political praxis, or are appropriating from other cultures because their witchcraft is from the book on Wicca that was written by a white anti-Semitist in the 1800s or whatever it was. And so, yeah, I think the word witch just to me is so important now to repeat and neutralize, because, and this is why I'm speaking to the political left, if you, or anybody who, if you see yourself as not in the traditional two-party identity, or anybody, honestly, anybody, witches are, I won't call it a slur. I'm absolutely not saying it's on the equivalent of other slurs out there, but it was a negative slur-ish term specifically created against Jewish people and mystic people to seed a fear of people, traditionally mostly women and femmes, who held the medicine, held the knowledge of the land, and refused to conform to patriarchy, colonialism. When the Christian church swept through, the people who said, fuck you, I'm keeping my original practices, my original religion, they said, you're a witch, and violence ensued. That's the history of witches. And these are the herbalists, the midwives, the astrologers, all of the people who simply believed beyond the logical, physical world were bucketed into witches, as well as people who didn't even fit those things, that were just different. Trans people, disabled people, people who like just visibly were ugly people, straight up ugly people. Like anybody deemed unworthy by the standard of this pinnacle, which is what brings us back to capitalism from the very start of the conversation. Anyone who didn't fit into this ideal consumer nuclear family, you're a witch, and witches are either to be feared or to be clowned on, straight up, like the way that witches are just made fun of and not taken seriously. That is my whole thing on witchcraft. Like, if you believe in ending stigmas against people based on race, color, anything, you should also ride for witches, honestly. If you're politically
marginalized.
Yeah, all the marginalized people, and that's indigenous. Like, witches preserve indigenous culture, indigenous ways of life, and indigenous perspectives. So if you respect that, but you're still talking down on or dismissing or making fun of anyone who calls themselves a witch, I just invite you to think deeper into that history.
Yeah.
How do you feel about calling yourself a witch? Because I know it's a little different.
Yeah. I think that I am still working through the fear of it. Because I grew up with specifically a grandmother who was very, so my grandmother is very conservative Christian within the Chinese Christian church. And I grew up like actually hiding anything related to magic. So like reading her, for example, like reading Harry Potter books before she came over, I would have to hide them. And in general, like just my body also was something that I grew up like always feeling like I had to hide. So for me, calling myself a witch is just feels so like liberating, because it is like unearthing so much of my childhood programming around magic, like the idea that we have agency over our lives, that we could actually influence and move beyond what societal standards are, that I could be divergent from the norm, like as you were saying, that I could show my body and dress in the ways that I want to, that I can venerate guides, that I could venerate, and have ancestral rituals, and write. And for me, writing is a spell. The words that I speak have potency and meaning, and that I have the capacity, I have the ability to enact change with them is like really, really powerful. And so I think it, to me, is like, it just still feels like still very conceptual. And I think I'm still kind of coming into the identity a little bit. And I think the context that you gave of the history of it is just so embedded in my unconscious and subconscious, because that is the collective too. The fear of like really coming out as that, and owning that witch title, I think is something I'm still working through, and I'm here to claim it, like even in that fear, because I know it's important, and I know it's something that does feel like my purpose here, and specifically, like I think it really speaks to my art practice of Photography. I'm a photographer. Part of my practice is self-portraiture and really showing so many different elements of who I am through my photography. Unsolved Mysteries says, I think it's more the fear of being your own person still takes hold to this day. Yeah, totally. And that's what it is for me, is like going against all these ideas of what my family wanted me to be, which was this perfect wife and member of conventional society, you know? And I think it is truly like owning that identity is my like kind of fuck you to those systems, not to them, but just to like the ways that I can truly see through how it's not really going towards the paradigm that I want to see the world emerge into. So
yeah, and that by embracing yourself, that discomfort for them is ancestral. There is this for practical reasons, because that is how your family became Christian. Like so many of us, everybody had their pre-Christianity beliefs, and it was, here's the way it is now. You can get with it, or you can get lost and not get lost. Like it's a choice. Like they'll disappear you. And so that was a survival tactic that many people use. And what's hilarious that we talk about all the time is just how freaking witchy those things are, because rather than so many of our like ancestors under Christian colonial cultures were like, well, this is still something I'm gonna build into my Christianity now. Like as a Filipino, the way that Filipinos do things, like being devout Catholics, is like, that shit is witchy as fuck.
It's a survival tactic.
You're cursing people. Like,
yeah, that was a survival tactic to shroud these mystical ways of doing of this magic within the colonized religion. So it's like that was the way that they were able to like keep those practices.
Yeah. And so in the comments, Unsolved Mystery said, African witchcraft does have its effect on people. Many Europeans consider their religious traditions as a form of witchcraft. Exactly. Everyone indigenous, everyone non-Christian has been considered a witch, and that lives on in many of these cultures today, in every culture. When I started calling myself a witch, a bruja, my family was like, why are you calling yourself that? Like they're appalled a little bit. And that's why, like you saying you're still unpacking the stigma, I still am too. Like it took me, I've gone back and forth, I've softened it, and it really wasn't until now that I realized the importance, because the truth is that it doesn't really matter what we call ourselves. Which, the phrase itself, it has German origins. We're not really that attached to it, but it's just starting to feel increasingly important to not be afraid to be grouped in, because there's nothing to fear, there's nothing to be ashamed about in embracing our indigenous and ancestral ways.
Yeah, it's shifting the definition, collective definition, I think is the important part for me, at least, to think about. Like, words have meaning, words have context, words have a history. So let's unpack the history of how we got here. And I think that's why we're here to do this work, and why I'm really excited that people, like, we've been so present on Instagram, these shorter form ways of communicating with the world, you know, through Instagram stories, through like what we post on our grid on Instagram. And this is a longer form way that we can really unpack these concepts and topics. So I'm really excited to be on Twitch and be doing this weekly, and YouTube.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're doing when we talk about like being in the soft power frequency is we're sharing this culture that we've been co-creating and inviting people in through like defining the terms of how we understand them and use them. So we may believe, and we do believe, that witchcraft is inherently political, and comes with a political, because the other thing I want to say is that how could you be, there's so many capitalist witches out there. To me, that makes no sense, because as a capitalism implies that you believe the earth is something to be conquered and commodified. If you are a witch in practice with the land, how does that add up if you are working with the elements, working with the land and your ancestors and the unseen, that you're then exploiting it and like starting endless merch lines that are made in really oppressive conditions? Like, you're destroying the earth with fast fashion and you're a witch. Like, it's not really adding up. And not to say it doesn't work, because there's a ton of unethical witches and their witchcraft works. Hello, we'll get into maybe like Kardashians one day.
Yeah.
That's like, they're for sure witches working with, if they're not doing it themselves, they have workers that are working, that are hired by them, and that shit works. But we believe you could just be a little more in integrity. We can all be in a little more integrity. So I think part of like soft power is just sharing this culture, inviting people into a different frequency of living. Because as we see it, we're like pulling these visions and building it here in real life. So background of who is in our community, it is people who are artists, who are healers, who are graphic designers, and I don't know, like so many different, very practical things. We're not here to tell people this is how you leave your job and make $1 million being a professional witch. Like, no, this is how you can neutralize, cross the bridge, and connect your energy to the bigger world and actually build something that's better, that people want to choose. Because we don't want to be in matching outfits, eating rations. Like, that's happened to people because there was still oppressive mindsets and lack of unpacking of some of the things behind it. Like, we're here to build something better, and people can choose to stay in the matrix world. But our world is fun. That's what we're here.
Yeah, and that's the thing too, is that this journey is so much fun. It can be so fun. It can be very challenging too. So showing not only, like, I think in a lot of spiritual spaces, it's either like all love and light or talking excessively about how hard it is and the shadow work and stuff. And it's like, we're here to hold the balance and also, do it in ways that we can laugh, that we can have fun, that we can joke too. Like, we're clowns, like, straight up. So I'm really juiced to show more of the multidimensionality of humans in general. We're not supposed to be one-dimensional. Like, we're not here to like show up as like some one dimension of who we are. There's so many layers of us that I think I want us to share. Make the revolution irresistible. Tony Kata Bambara. Yup.
Yeah, that's what we're here, I think, to show people, is that it's fun and pleasurable, and that's just the life that we've chosen to participate in, while still participating in other things, while still working on our family relationships, while still struggling through generating enough resources to keep us going. And so I think that was like, I mean, this show is a huge, huge leap of faith in us believing that we could be supported by our community for continuing to show up and hold this space. So that will be a quiet plug for our coffee, which is in the link on both pages, to donate to us to help us grow this space, because we do have regular events. A few of the other cosmic siblings are, I like to call my cosmic colleagues, are in the chat, who hold their own spaces. We co-create spaces together, and in these spaces, it's just so fun. Like, it's just fun to be in a Zoom space, laughing, dancing, moving, meditating, resting together. That is kind of the culture we're creating for people who feel like they have no other place of belonging, because that's how we felt. That's how we found each other. It's like feeling like there was no place for us, being a little cringed out by certain places that we were finding and being like, we like the way that we do it, and other people that come might like it this way too. And so we're not for everybody,
And we're
but
not supposed to be.
yeah, exactly. We're for the people who feel different, who feel isolated, who don't want to suffer anymore, who like want to not have to explain themselves when they say, I don't know, just speaking your politics or your spirituality and feeling like you have to give a lot of preface and background. I still feel that. Do you? I feel that outside of our spaces, I'm reminded we spend so much time together, especially during the pandemic. It's so easy to be in our world that we've co-created. And so that is why we're opening up our world too, because it is important to remind ourselves like, okay, we have other friends and family who are finding their way. So what's that been like for you?
Yeah, I think what is coming to mind for me is like, I think I used to have to feel like I have to prove myself to people more, like to people that I felt like didn't understand me when I didn't have a solid community. And I think now that I do have the sense of belonging with you, with my other friends, with what we're building with soft power, I do feel this sense of belonging. So I'm not like aching to be understood all the time. And I think it's more about embodiment for me. Like, how am I stepping into spaces and just radiating my values by how I move in the world instead of having to shove them down people's throats and be really like, and always feel like I have to fight.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's, I think, just a really succinct way to explain what we're doing. It's like, it's really about, we use this term a lot, embodiment. Like, what are we, how is everything in my life speaking to my values? Like, how does it really trace back to my values in every way that I show up in the world, in my relationships, in my business, in my art practice, in literally like what I wear, what I choose to buy, you know? And it's like, how do I exist in integrity?
Yeah, totally. Because it's hard, and we're never going to get it perfect, but we can continue to try. We can continue to learn. You're so right about that. Like, I mean, I think that is just what soft power in itself is like not fighting so much to be heard, and instead hearing ourselves, building trusting relationships that we hear each other and trust each other to receive us in our wholeness. And again, it comes back to the political place, because that laying down of the sword is part of abolition. We're not here to police anybody. We're not here to force anybody into the world. We think Mother Nature is going to push us in a certain direction that's going to give that urgency of why you might want to reassess some things, but we're not your mama. Like, we joke, I may joke that I'm your Cancer mom or the fairy godmother over here. Like, we're not your mama. Like, we're not going to police you into thinking like us. We can only show you that the way that we exist and the frequency that we vibe on is tight. And if you're looking for a different way to live, like, come join us.
Yep. Well, that is a beautiful transition maybe to the reading, the oracle reading. Okay.
Last thing I want to read actually is this comment, because I really love it.
Yes.
Unsolved Mystery says, I don't know if I consider myself as a necromancer, but someone who likes being outside and connecting with environmental energy. I have a tendency of seeing energy flow from other people.
Wow.
This is like the seed planting, I think, for so many. Not everybody is the obvious medium. I literally can see Grandma Sue with her hair in a bun. Like, no, that is a rare gift that many have and many can develop, but so many of us are experiencing these things. You're seeing energy flow from other people. That's freaking tight. Like, that is just the lens of seeing the world. That's why I said I don't even call my spirituality a belief. I call it the way I experience reality, because maybe others don't experience reality in the same way of like interconnectivity and seeing energy. And maybe some people experience in different ways, but we all have these ways of connecting to, I would just say, the oneness, connecting to spirit, to source, to this feeling that we're connected to one another. What are the ways that you you have a few and they've grown, so you're like, what are the ways that
well, it all really began actually with reading oracle cards. I got my first deck, and I remember pulling a card and being like, this is wildly on point, because it came with a guidebook. So I would read, then I started really kind of getting a little addicted to it, because I would pull and be like, this is just exactly the message that I needed right now. It would be really uncanny, and it wouldn't be necessarily a general message. Like, this deck was pretty pointed, I would say, in its guidance. So now my oracle reading practice has really grown into the point where I feel like I get very, very specific messages on what's happening for people. And it could be as specific as if they're moving or if they're going through a breakup. And it's usually like around major life changes and shifts. And it's been pretty cool to collect that empirical evidence of the things that I say that ends up actually happening in the future. And it's not that necessarily that I'm like changing their reality or like even prophesizing. It's more like I feel like I connect to our interconnectedness, and the ways that when I'm in a session with someone or when I'm reading for somebody, I can tap into that sort of interconnectedness between that exists between all of us. And so when I said in my about section that I am like translating messages from the unseen, that's what I'm talking about. And that's when we say the soft power frequency, it is that literally energetic connection that happens between all of us. So oracle cards is one of them. Astrology is a way that I can really read people's energy, really see an imprint, a cosmic imprint of their life. And it's an art practice to me. It is something that is, like I said, it's actually empirical evidence that has been gathered over thousands of years. And to me, it's an art form, and it's a language that I speak. So astrology has been a really beautiful way to connect interpersonally with people in a deeper way, as well as my art practice and photography and self-portraiture is a way that I can really feel like I can communicate those messages. So it's like the receiving of them through oracle cards, astrology, and then the expression through photography and my art practice. What about you?
I love that. Dreams are a big way that I've received messages since I was young, to the point where I would literally be like, I don't want to dream anymore. Like, I need to rest, because it would be so intense and exhausting, which is why I have better energy practices now. Also, I'm very like sensey, like I could feel different sensations on my body, my foot, my eyebrow twitching, like, and over time I've begun to recognize what that's like, where that's coming from. Tarot is a huge one. And also so often these gifts we have are passed through our lineage. So I became a tarot reader a few years ago, and then learned recently that my biological grandmother, who I never met, was an avid tarot reader. Like, that was her thing, that she was known by, that she had the gift with the cards. And so that's one. And then writing is a huge one for me. Like, when I'm writing, sometimes I'll just like the voice changes ever so slightly to being more elegant or more firm, or the tense will switch where I'm journaling and it will turn into you, Siobhan, like I'm talking to myself, and that belief. And so much of it is just that belief. It's believing that it's something more, and it's faith driven, because maybe we're completely wrong and we are just fucking crazy. But guess what? Our belief helps us to help other people.
We choose to believe.
We are being able to be of service, we're able to live our lives better. I don't really care what you believe if it makes you a good person.
Exactly. Like, are you living in alignment to your value system?
Yeah. I have a question that was submitted. A question that was submitted that can close this, and then we'll go into the collective reading, which was writer's block, because this is a show sharing our creative process. Any advice for getting through writer's block? Energy, intuition, or stars wise?
Wow.
What's your initial?
Great
I have a thought.
question.
Do you want to start? Or do you want me to start?
Yeah. So I didn't mention writing, but I'm really glad that you did, and I'm glad that this person brought it up, because writing is also a way that I feel like I can tap in. And free flow writing has been a really, really great way to open up that channel for me, and it's really getting out of what like the sensor mind, the logical mind, and just letting myself go with whatever pours through, even if it's like writing the same word over and over again, but just really allowing myself to just not be critical of even the way the sentence structure looks like. It doesn't have to make sense. And I feel like that free flow writing practice really allows me to unlock a lot of creativity. And yeah, that's been really great. It's interesting because I think I used to really value or really think that I needed to like handwrite stuff in order to like unlock my writer's block, or like to be considered like, oh, like I'm writing this thing and this is legit if it's like in a journal. And I actually prefer to do it on a computer. And that's like been the way that because I don't think lately if I write in a journal, I don't look back at it, and I don't have any way to like organize my thoughts. And I actually like doing that on a doc, so that I can reference it later, because a lot of what pours through is like visions for the future, or like something that I really want to like archive. So yeah, I would say don't get locked into specifically a way you have to write. Like, I think there's a lot of emphasis like on handwriting stuff, and I like to type on a computer, and I like to do that even on my phone. Another way that I think could be helpful would be voice notes. Sometimes I don't feel like writing, and I actually just need to say something, and then I'll go and listen back to the voice note and type out the whatever came through. So I think that would be my advice for writer's block, is explore different ways. Because if you're having a writer's block, I think there's maybe something in the way that you're doing it that isn't necessarily maybe leading you to another way of expressing, and another process that could be more aligned for you.
Yeah, I would say for me, getting out of, I think writer's block comes when we're very in our head, seeking the words that maybe haven't made their way to our lips yet, that are in there. That's how tarot cards work. That's how oracle cards work. It's like pulling into the non-physical data of what's making its way. And so I would say change up your approach, similar to what you said, but get out of your head and get into your body, get into the place of flow and intuition, whether that's you need to move, shake, tapping. Highly recommend to check out Soul Play. Soul Play shares a lot of like moving our chi will give us the ability to drop into the state of channeling. And for me, when I'm stuck on what to write and it's starting to hit that wall of feeling forced, that's when I take a step back and either move my body and drop into meditation intentionally, or I will go to my altar and light a candle and say, I'm really seeking the words right now. How can I, what are the words that I'm looking for? And sitting, dancing, singing, whatever it is, doing whatever it is that puts me in a flow state to find them. Sometimes if I'm really stuck on something, I'll say it out loud or write it down to my dreams. Like, in my dreams tonight, can you please give me some more information about what I'm doing? That's what we did for this. Like, that is our creative process. A huge, huge part of it is like, how can we utilize these different magical tools? Like pulling out the oracle cards, like, what is the most important thing that I need to say here? And my cards tell me, like, power, care, whatever, like it is. It's like, oh, that's where I'm going with this. Anything that can get you, that can dig into the other data available. Sometimes calling a friend and just talking to them, hearing it out loud, clarity comes. Yeah, anything that drops you into the flow state of thinking and out of the conscious mind for a second. And then sometimes you just got to give it a rest, which is kind of hard when you have deadlines and things. But it all comes down to trust in that. If you're on a crunch and you need the words, that's when I would really like do some somatic practice and take that 5 minutes to meditate or whatever it is.
Reset. Yeah, definitely. And don't, like, what I think really unlocked I've always said I'm not a good writer. Like, that's been something that's programmed into me as a child. But if I just sit down and free flow write without censoring what comes through and then go back and edit later, it's always just like allowing yourself to just put it on the paper and not getting out of your conscious.
Oh yeah, that's my last tip.
Boom.
Write high, edit sober.
Exactly. And oh my gosh, there's just
a famous writer that was like, write drunk, edit sober. For me, I will say it's having a good strain of creative cannabis that I can hit. And it brings Midori has witnessed this process 5,000 times with me, right? Where I smoke, I have no earth in my chart. So once I do that, then I'm like, oh, this is a perspective I needed.
Yeah. And I have to also speak to the structural and systemic like ways that I think writer's block could show up too, is like this institutional way we've been taught that we need to write, through, if you went to college or if you went to like going through the schooling system, it's like you have to write everything in double space. Like, I think that's like actually kind of what traumatized me into like, and I think what is really shows up for people in writer's block is that you have to feel like the end result needs to, or while you're even typing it needs to make like logical sense, or it needs to look a certain way. And that's part of the creative process. I think that is important for me to bring, to always remember in my process is like, it doesn't have to look a certain way. Your process can be totally different. It could be jumping on a trampoline for 15 seconds before you sit down to write. It could be doing a voice note and transferring the data after, the words after.
Tap into your creative centers. For people who like to engage with the chakra system, that's your womb space, wherever that is for you. How can you activate that space? Masturbate. Honestly,
literally,
that will activate your creativity right there. Yep. Your source of creation. Okay, cool. I love that answer. And I kind of want to shout out one of the greatest writing tips I actually had that stuck with me. I think the only one that ever stuck with me was my professor, Ginger Hendricks at Cal Poly Slow, my English professor, Ginger Hendricks. Shout out to Ginger, which was just never delete anything. Like any draft we did, it was like even the littlest thing, like find like a dumping grounds for all of your phrases. So then later when you're stuck, you can go back and kind of scan things of like, oh, like this is, this thing that came through one time. So you just kind of have like a little like back burner of content and that, I think this isn't how that professor spoke about it, but I'm connecting this now that like, that's also part of honoring the divine place that our creativity comes through. And that's part of honoring those words that came, even if they're not for the right project, the right deliverable. And at the end of the day, that's what editors are for. Get an editor, get somebody to put their eyes on it and just say like, outside looking in, this is what I'm seeing. I do that. I offer that service. So you can always reach out to me.
Well,
Email
also,
me
you
and
can
we'll
create
talk.
your
Call
own
Siren.
containers. You can create your own containers for, like, for me, I know that I'm someone who loves to do things with people and likes the social interaction. So if you have a writer's block, put it on your calendar and invite a friend and do it together. And that's always a great way. That could be something that helps you unblock your creativity as well.
Love. All right. Perfect. Let's get into the reading for the week.
Let's get into the reading for the week. This is from the Asian American Literary Review Tarot deck.
And this week we got Mercury direct today. We've got, and what sign is it?
It's in Cap.
Ooh, Capricorn.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got Aquarius, the sun moving into Aquarius on Friday, on Venus Day, where Venus is already hanging out in Aquarius. And then Saturday, the moon. We have a new moon in Aquarius, and that's the Lunar New Year. So for anybody listening before Saturday at noon, go to With Soft Power on Instagram to check out our Lunar New Year party. The exact new moon time, I think, is like 12:53, 12:58 Pacific on Saturday. And so we will be gathering. The fairy goddess will be leading us through the somatic practice, and then we'll drop into this place of creativity and letting our imaginations play, connect with our ancestor, calling in the magic of the water rabbit here. And so that's all the energy swirling this reading. Preliminary swirl.
Y'all, okay, this is really wonderful. Should I read it or should we?
You know what's so weird about you pulling that?
What?
Is because I just said your ancestor singular, and in my head I was like, why did I say that singularly and not ancestors? I don't know if anyone else heard me say that, but I was like, you'll connect with your ancestor.
Evidence. I think we should just speak on it intuitively. What's coming through for you?
Are those birds? Bluebirds? The ancestor. If this is an energy to guide us for the collective this week, especially for me seeing this as an Asian American on the week of Lunar New Year, this idea that our ancestors, everything we've talked about can come down to that, like our gifts, our ways of connecting, of dropping in, that's ancestral. And our ancestors' DNA is literally in our body, and we can access that information through these different practices. And this is, I think ancestor is a great starting point for this show too, because I think that's a concept that's really easy for people newer to channeling or spiritual connection to get, because we all believe this. For me, ancestors was always conceptual, and we were still honoring our ancestors. Many cultures, having altars to offer food to our ancestors, offer different offerings. And so if you believe in that, there's data. So if you don't believe in it, check out the data of what lives in our DNA, epigenetics, and intergenerational trauma and gifts. This is the moment of reconnecting to our ancestral ways. This is the moment, and it is important. It's urgent in a lot of ways, because if we want to survive on this earth, we actually need to reconnect both to the survival tactics and the joy that they kept throughout. I think that's the starting point. That's really what most of my personal work is around, is like connecting people to their ancestors, even if it's just that one that is there and ready to help you and guide you. It's taking it from acknowledgement that they exist, acknowledgement that we share DNA, to an active opportunity to have a relationship and to call on more guidance.
Mm-hmm.
What are you thinking?
Wow. Yeah, I was reading the back of the card because all the cards have an excerpt from different Asian American writers. And it says, sometimes mistaken as, so the ancestor is the 9th card in the major arcana. Sometimes mistaken as purely familial, the ancestor is of the imagination, but the historical one. Nearing the halfway point in the major arcana, the ancestor symbolizes the oh my gosh, chiasmus. One tends to make between past and present when one makes sense of history. I think a lot about like the term future ancestors, and I think a lot also about like the term 7 generations forward, 7 generations back. And like, this is why we are doing this work to, you know, to really speak to how are we building a future that will sustain future generations and also honor where we came from. And so many of us are remembering our histories that have been erased, you know, that have been forgotten. And what are the stories if you don't have connection to people in the earth plane, people, if you didn't grow up with those stories being told, how do you form them for yourself? Like, how do you create this narrative, this story of, and what is your history? And that's something I've been really forming for myself. Is I don't have necessarily the opportunity to ask questions for one side of my family, on my grandparents' side. So on the generation of my grandparents. So how do I create those stories? And how do I create that cultural context to inform where I'm going? Because I think it's really important to have that context and to ground into that. Because if you don't know your past, then you don't know what came before you. Then how are you going to, like, the concept of roots is really, really, I think, yeah, the concept of history and where you come from is really important so that it can lay the foundation. Because if we don't know where we came from, we're not going to know where we're going. We have to have that sort
And
of,
you're
like,
more likely to steal from other people.
yes,
I think,
exactly.
like, when you don't know your own
Okay.
roots, when we're disconnected, we're so much more likely to cause harm.
Exactly. So
I think this card was like spirit promoting. Well, it's not really, because I'm like, is spirit giving us a free advertising opportunity here? Because that really is the goal of Saturday's gathering. Ancestors, like you said, like, we're honoring. Flo in the chat said that many Asian cultures have ancestral worship or veneration. That's central. That's why it's always been in our vernacular, and it only opened to a deeper extent, you know, in the last few years, to what that actual, like, oh, I could literally talk to them, or oh, they're literally talking through me. My ancestor took over my body. That happens for me sometimes.
Same. Yeah, and like, we are literally there. Yeah, biologically we're descendants, and there's these memories and the DNA that's been passed down from them biologically. So I think it's really important for me to acknowledge that. Yeah, it just feels really deep. I'm like, yeah, this is the work that we're here to do, and provide representation for Asian Americans, people of the diaspora, to reclaim that, and not saying that we have it all figured out.
Yeah, totally. When I think about what it means for me to be a future ancestor, this is just coming right back to where we started in this conversation today, which is why we're here at this exact moment in time, why we came to this timeline, born when we were born. All the other paths where, you know, you and I have a shared path, but we also have our own individual paths. And understanding in that sense that like there's the collective and our individual journeys, but to really operate like an ancestor, it's thinking beyond ourselves, thinking of those things, looking behind us at what gifts and stories and things are there to pull on, and then looking ahead, and it's taking responsibility for where we're at, because I think that is true for many of us at this moment in time. It's such a theme. If you have parents that are boomers, or like if you have parents that are refugees, immigrants, like wherever they came from, so many of us probably spent a good chunk of time wishing and feeling victim to what we were handed. And I think that's a real core of soft power, is moving out of the victimhood of it shouldn't be this way. Like we both spent enough time in the victimhood and the rage of it shouldn't be this way. I didn't do shit to deserve this. What did I spent so much of my life like that? Like, what did I do to deserve this life? You know, like I didn't deserve this, the trauma, this whatever. And then being like, oh, but I have an opportunity to change it. And I want to gift that to our future ancestors that come after us. I want to gift them a different problem to address. Shout out Dr. Kiki. We talked a lot about this during her pregnancy when I was her doula, which was, how can I heal these things and hand my child an opportunity to move from a different space? Like, how can I chip away at this ancestral trauma? How can I chip away and uncover these ancestral gifts and then create a new culture for ourselves? So that is what I'll bring it to for Saturday. Like, Saturday is about reclaiming our culture as two people who didn't necessarily grow up is that right for you, right? Like not necessarily celebrating Lunar New Year.
Yeah. I didn't have, I mean, we gathered, but I didn't, the cultural importance of it was not drilled home.
Yeah, it was like, here's your red envelope.
Yeah.
I'm like, sweet, okay, I'm gonna spend this on some candy. Like, exactly. Let me collect like my little, and so it is like part of our opportunity. And that's, I think, back to what we always talk about, is like the opportunity to create something. We, among us in the Fairy Goddess, were like, wow, we have an opportunity to gather other Asian Americans who may feel disconnected from these cultural practices. And maybe we don't relate to the ones existing. Maybe we don't want to go to a capitalist, consumerist celebration. And maybe we want to spend it moving our bodies and resting together. And that is the culture we're creating as future ancestors, that for our children, like that's so cool to think of for me, like our children or grandchildren being like, how did they celebrate our aunties, our elders? We gathered and we rested together, and then we shared a meal, and then we,
it's the convergence of, this day and age in the past and the
That's
future.
How culture was always created.
Convergence.
Necessity, what's available. We're not here to completely return to pre-colonial ways because we're in a modern world.
Totally.
Yeah.
That was really, really special.
You are a future, you're an ancestor in the making. We are ancestors in the making. And so I'm going to pull just a couple cards left to leave some light themes for the week, which is, if you're newer to the concept of ancestors, if you're not really sure how to get started with that, I want to ask my cards here, like, what does our collective, what do the people listening need to hear as far as how to reconnect to their role and opportunity as future ancestors? Family, play, rebirth.
And that just speaks to, yeah, we are birthing a new way of being that hasn't existed yet. Yeah, that's creativity to me. It's a creative practice. How are we designing our lives to honor the past and where we see ourselves going and what we have, the tools we have available through, and not only like not be so serious about it. How do we play and express ourselves in ways that like, and that is ancestral veneration to me, is being able to lean into the pleasure and play of it, because so much of at least what past generations of experience has been hardship and like survival. So we are the generation that gets to choose, that gets to play, and that's such a gift.
Yeah, we get to play, we get to birth new ways, and we also get to choose our families to an extent. That's something I think maybe will be for a future episode, is really digging into that, our families of origin and our chosen family and our chosen ancestors. Ancestors are not just the people blood related to you. They're the people you choose. They can be people you've admired. They could be social justice leaders. They could be plants. They could be so many things. Animal ancestors. Family, play, and rebirth. We are rebirthing. The world, the earth is rebirthing a paradigm.
And it's going to, whether you like it or not, literally.
Exactly.
So you're either tapped into it.
That shit will come. You gotta give that. You gotta birth for that outcome, whether you want to or not. There's no other way out.
If you want to be conscious about it or get forced into it, and we're here for the people who want to do it in the most easeful way possible. Yep.
Well, that was episode 1. We'll be here every Wednesday. Follow us on Instagram at With Soft Power. If you are watching, whether you're on YouTube or Twitch, if you're on YouTube, hit subscribe and hit the notification bell, please. If you're on Twitch, we're not asking for subscriptions at this time, but definitely follow. And if you feel called to donate to help us continue to show up, to sustain this project, to bring on guests down the line, we're here to stay. That's part of the concept, is we are tapped in because we are not tapping out. There's no other option for Midori and I, and we are just scratching the surface of that story for ourselves, of how we are still going and could have given up 500,012 times. But we've worked together because the only way through is together. The only way we build is by having the support, because it is lonely to live a life of integrity and authenticity. It's not the popular route. It's not the profitable route, but we're here to support each other. And so far it's birthed really, really beautiful things. So I will let you ring us out, Fairy Godmother.
Yeah, so just taking a breath with you all, if you have capacity. Thank you to all of our ancestors and the generations that came before us. Thank you to all the generations that are going to come after us. And yeah, really, really grateful for this space. Thank you to all of our guides that have led us here. And we'll catch y'all on the next one. Wednesdays, 1:11 p.m. Pacific. YouTube, follow our Instagram if you want to keep in the loop with our events. We got one going on this Saturday, so you can find us on Instagram and join us for the Lunar New Year special of Soul Play, and a really, really fun event. We're all inviting y'all to join, and we'll catch y'all soon. signing off.